What does the Trump presidency mean for the world? Hello, I'm Arnold Naidu, and this is The Heat. On Monday, several key dignitaries attended the swearing-in of Donald Trump. This included one of China's highest-ranking officials, Chinese Vice President Han Zheng, Argentine President Javier Milei, and Italian Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni, among others. This is the first time international leaders have appeared at the inauguration. So, what does a new U.S. administration mean for global geopolitics? To discuss this and more, let's bring in our guests. Joining us from New Hampshire, Freeman is a former U.S. ambassador to Saudi Arabia and was the principal American interpreter for President Nixon's visit to Beijing in 1972. From Massachusetts, we're joined by Jorge Heine. He is a research professor at the Pardee School of Global Studies at Boston University and a former Chilean ambassador to China. And in Oregon, Liang is chair professor in economics at Willamette University. Thanks, everyone, for joining us. Ambassador Jorge Heine, Vice President Han Zheng, as I said, he was at President Trump's inauguration on Monday. He came as the special representative of President Xi Jinping, whom Trump had invited. I mean, this is the first time we've had a senior Chinese leader at an inauguration. So looking at that, what does it signal to the rest of the world about Trump's approach to China?
Well, I will say this. There are basically two views on what Mr. Trump's policies toward China will be. One of them is that it will be a replay of Trump 1.0. That is, a relationship that started on a relatively sound footing, but ended up quickly unraveling and leading to a trade war and a tech war and went downhill from there. The other alternative, to which I would tend to subscribe, is that this is a rather different moment, a rather different situation, that there are a number of signals that have been emitted, like President Trump's invitation to President Xi to attend the inauguration, the telephone conversation they had, the decision by President Trump to suspend the TikTok ban, all signals that might indicate a somewhat different approach, perhaps the possibility of some sort of grand bargain with China. The two possibilities are still very much out there. The fact that many of the Trump appointees in the foreign policy and national security field are very much China hawks obviously is a matter of concern. But I wouldn't discount the possibility that we would have a quite different type of relationship with China on the part of the United States in this new second Trump mandate.
Ambassador Heine, I'm wondering about some of the people that President Trump has appointed. As you point out, some of them are hawks. They're very, they take a hardline view on China. But there are others, like one of his main advisors, Elon Musk, who has a very different view of the relationship with China.
Absolutely. And it seems to me, in that sense, we shouldn't underestimate Mr. Trump's unpredictability on the one hand, and his transactional approach to the relationship in business in general and with the rest of the world. Let me point out, a lot of people expected that the moment Mr. Trump was inaugurated, he would start China bashing right away. He has not done that. So it seems to me we should keep our minds open as to what will happen in that regard.
Liang, Vice President Han Zheng also met with the U.S. Vice President, J.D. Vance. He met with the aforementioned Elon Musk as well. He met with business representatives of the U.S.-China Business Council, the United States Chamber of Commerce, and others as well. Vice President emphasized the importance of U.S. companies' continued investments in China. With the United States and China being the two biggest economies in the world, how are businesses going to be creating this sort of bridge of cooperation between the two countries?
Right, good to talk to you. I think the business relationship, the economic relationships are really the backbone between the U.S. and China relationships. I think President Trump has been seeing this relationship in somehow a zero-sum game, but China's position has been always very consistent and clear that two countries should really have mutual respect, peaceful coexistence, but also, mutual cooperation, mutually beneficial cooperations. So I think that reflects in this business transactions and business interactions. So we know, as you mentioned, Elon Musk, he has a gigafactory of Tesla in China. His Tesla has been benefiting from China's, for example, trade-in program and made really handsome revenues in China, offsetting some of the revenue loss in the rest of the world. So, and of course, Elon Musk is not the unique business person that benefits from this kind of mutual cooperation, right, in business and economics between U.S. and China. So I think, President Trump probably would also recognize that, as we see that in recent days, he has been having very conciliatory kind of tones between when it comes to China. He mentioned so many times the 60% tariff rates, and nothing really came out at this point yet. He only mentioned about 10% tariff rate, and without very specific timeline. He, of course, like you mentioned, invited Vice President Han Zheng, and he himself also repeatedly mentioned that he wanted to visit China within the first 100 days. Yeah. So I think all of these indicates that he would revisit some of his earlier, I think, pledges and promises, seeing the benefits of this kinds of economic relationships. Now, that said, I also agree that he can say one thing one day and completely renege on another day, and it's more important to see his actions. So I think it remains to be seen.
Ambassador Freeman, one of President Trump's signature battle cries is America first. And, as we are all aware, international relations are a sort of tenuous balance of give and take, of compromise. So what are your thoughts on the more nationalistic tendencies in his foreign policy?
Well, Mr. Trump's focus is very much domestic. He rode to power on the anger and disgruntlement of a very significant portion of the American public. But he has taken a number of foreign policy steps right off the bat, which actually reduce American influence and create leadership vacuum that China may well fill. One of these is the withdrawal from the Paris Accords. The world at large is very concerned about climate change. The United States is now going to go in a different direction. The other was the withdrawal from the World Health Organization, which is important to manage pandemics, early warning, research on vaccines, and so forth. And the United States will now be denied those benefits. And again, this is a leadership vacuum that may very well tempt China into it. So you can't abstract the U.S.-China bilateral relationship from the broader global picture. And Mr. Trump may have gone easy on China initially, as I believe he has, and signaled an intention to engage with China as well as with Russia, which the previous administration barely did. In the case of Russia, not at all. But he's also launched a series of trade wars against almost everybody: Canada, Mexico, the EU, European Union, the BRICS group, and so forth are all under threat. And this means that there will be a period of chaos and shaking out, both in the global economy and in global politics. And again, I think Liang is absolutely correct. We can't tell what will happen. We have to wait and see.
Do you expect, Ambassador Freeman, there to be more strains in the relationship with NATO? He has threatened a number of times to pull out of the alliance. This is one of the most enduring alliances in the world that was created after World War II. But what do you see happen next?
Well, NATO in many ways functions as the American sphere of influence in Europe, which is why the Russians objected to its extension to their borders. Within that sphere of influence, U.S. troops and weaponry are commonly deployed. Obviously, the Russians would not welcome that. China has been essentially neutral on this subject. it is charged by American officials with taking sides, with being pro-Russian. But that is not accurate unless you apply the canon, they're either with us or they're against us. So if China isn't with us in putting pressure on Russia, it is defined as being against us. But I don't think the bulk of the NATO countries are any more in agreement on what should happen because of the threatened trade war with the European Union, because of the fact that the war in Ukraine, which NATO has been conducting largely by proxy, has essentially been lost to the Russians, because Mr. Trump's stance on NATO is ambivalent and somewhat threatening. He seems to regard it as a protection racket into which you should pay a certain amount of money to be protected. That is not its nature.
Okay, joining us now from Beijing is Victor Gao. He is chair professor at Soochow University. Victor, great to see you. We are talking about the impact the new Trump administration will have on the rest of the world in international relations in general. It seems that one of the cornerstones of his foreign policy is the imposition of tariffs. I mean, he's threatened China with tariffs, but if we look beyond China as well, he's also threatened neighbors like Canada and Mexico, and he's threatened European allies as well. I mean, what kind of an impact could this have, not just, you know, on the neighboring countries, but on the global economy?
First of all, let's congratulate President Donald Trump on becoming the U.S. president for the second term. He's highly controversial both inside the United States and on the global scene. But let me give him the best of hope if he chooses to do the right thing. And you mentioned the tariffs. Tariffs against China are not working. The tariffs are not paid by China by any single penny. The tariffs charged by the United States against Chinese export to the United States are basically a kind of tax against the American people. It's one of the reasons why inflation is running away. And if President Trump continues to or further increases the tariffs against Chinese exports to the United States, eventually the American people will suffer and possibly even be forced to rebel against such high tariffs, which cause more inflation. Between China and the United States, I think we need to get along with each other. I personally believe there is the inevitability of peace between China and the United States rather than the so-called destined for war scenario. Right. And I hope President Trump will really honor his promise of not launching any war during his 4 years of presidency. And that gives us hope that whatever problems there are between China and the United States, we need to solve them by diplomacy and negotiations.
Right. Ambassador Heine, there's been some speculation, that's in the run-up to the inauguration, that President Trump will pay more attention to the countries of Latin America than he has in his first term, or for that matter, than President Biden paid during his 4 years in office. I mean, there were a number of Latin American leaders at the inauguration. They included, as we mentioned, the Argentine President Javier Milei, as well as the Ecuadorian President Daniel Noboa and the Paraguayan President Santiago Peña. How do you see relations with Latin America evolve in the next 4 years?
Yes, that's a great question. It's important to keep in mind the following. In his first term, President Trump showed no interest in Latin America. In fact, he only visited the region once in his 4 years, and that was to attend the G20 summit in Buenos Aires, which could have been held anywhere. So that speaks for itself. He also skipped, famously, the Summit of the Americas held in Lima in 2018. So that's number one. Number two, on the other hand, at this moment, he has threatened to impose tariffs on Mexico. He has threatened to take back the Panama Canal. And in the matter of mass deportations, they would overwhelmingly affect Latin American countries, which form the majority of undocumented workers in the United States. So that is something for which Latin America is bracing for. I will say this, what is called the attention the most among Latin American leaders and public opinion are his references to the Panama Canal. That is something, is a very sore issue in Latin America. And it seems to me it's something that really has brought the region together the region regards the issue of Panamanian sovereignty over the canal is not just a Panamanian issue, but a regional issue. And that, it seems to me, is something that will be front and center in months to come.
Liang, moving to the relationship with Europe beyond just defense issues, the economic relationship, I mean, we see that European countries are already facing economic headwinds. I mean, you take Europe's biggest economy, for instance, Germany. It's under stress right now, and projected growth is very anemic. But, you know, here we have President Trump, who's talking about America First policies. How will that be received in European capitals?
Right. So this protectionism kind of stands, and also this idea that trade is basically a zero-sum game, I think would really make a lot of the United States' allies really feel, nerve-wracking. I think European economies, especially so, they're very much integrated into the world economy. They very much rely on the United States economy and also China's market, for example, for their exports. And so I think you asked the question earlier in terms of, levying tariffs on not just the adversaries, but also allies. I think this just shows, again, the mentality that the belief that tariffs is able to bring in revenues for the United States. The matter of fact is that in the past 70 years, U.S.'s tariff revenue never exceeded 2% of their federal budgets. And last year, 2023, it was about $77 billion, which is about 1.57% of the federal revenue. So this is really I think, wishful thinking that you can just levy other countries to be rich, right, in Donald Trump's mindset. But also, I think this idea of using tariffs as a weapon to really get what sort of the deals, right? I think, again, this will do more harms, not only to other countries' economy, but also, more importantly, to the United States economy. So as I think Victor Gao also just mentioned, in terms of inflationary pressure, but also, I think, in some ways undermine their own industrial competitiveness, because all the imported immediate goods would be more expensive. So that would undercut businesses' bottom line. Now, when it comes to the airlines, I think last time when Donald Trump was in office, we have seen the pull out of the TPP. But Japan, for example, one of the closest ally of the United States, has really taken the lead role to establish the TCPPP. So I think the idea here is that the rest of the world is not going to stay put, and it's not going to just do exactly what Trump would want them to do, but rather they will move on. They will try to establish more multilateral relationships. They will, also have more bilateral agreements to move forward, because it is important for not just, Europe, but also China, Japan, and many other countries in the world to be participate in that global economy, in that division of labor, but also in that cooperation to drive the economy forward.
Ambassador Freeman, shortly before his inauguration, President Trump talked about global security, and he says he wants to end wars, he wants to unify the world. I mean, what kind of progress do you expect there? Because, he says these things, but at the same time, he says he wants to be able to buy Greenland, for instance. He wants to be able to take over the Panama Canal again. I mean, where do you see this heading?
Well, Mr. Trump does not like globalization, that's clear, but he does like imperialism. And he cited in his inaugural speech President McKinley, who, with Teddy Roosevelt, seized the Panama Canal from Colombia, which Panama was then part, and basically controlled Panama until 1977, when two treaties were signed between the United States and Panama. One turning over the control of the Panama Canal entirely to the Panamanians, who have frankly done a terrific job of managing the canal, and the other reserving to the United States the right to intervene if Panama were to discriminate against the users of the canal. It has not done so. So I would say on the security front, Mr. Trump is, as Ambassador Heine implied, is more likely to unite the world against the United States than with us. Latin America may well cohere in defense of Panama. I could even see a joint military defense of Panama by Latin American countries. And I think also the Trump approach to negotiations with the threats, provocations, tariffs, pressure of one sort or another is more likely to drive, as Liang said, is more likely to drive other countries together and isolate the United States. So this isn't what Mr. Trump intends, clearly, but then he has a number of totally counterproductive theories, among them the tariff argument, which he believes foreigners pay the tariff, but American consumers and importers are the ones who pay it. And I think he's just going to divert trade to others. That's already happened. China's percentage of trade with the United States now is far less than it was during Mr. Trump's first term. Chinese trade has been redirected toward ASEAN, the Association of Southeast Asian Nations, and toward the rest of the world, and the BRICS, toward the countries that participate in the various Belt and Road initiatives.
Right.
So I think this this policy that Mr. Trump is planning to implement is very likely not to unify people with us, with the Americans, but to divide us.
What about key flashpoints like the Middle East, like Ukraine? I mean, these are places where the United States is actually deeply involved itself in those conflicts there. Do you see relatively quick resolutions to these conflicts?
No, I think there is no Gordian knot to be cut in Ukraine. There are three major issues which Vladimir Putin enunciated in December of 2021, which remain the core. One is, what is the status of the Russian-speaking minority, very substantial minority in Ukraine, and by extension, other minorities, Hungarians, Romanians, and others. That question was resolved in the Minsk Accords, but then they were undone by Ukraine and the sponsors, France and Germany. So that is a major issue. Second is Ukraine, as it was when it became independent, going to be neutral, or is it going to be part of the American sphere of influence in Europe? Obviously, the latter is unacceptable to Russia, right, and that is why it went to war. And the third issue, of course, which the Russians stress, is the need for a broad security architecture in Europe that threatens neither Russia nor the other European countries. So that is the important agenda, and it can't be addressed overnight.
Right. Ambassador Heine, President Trump has rolled back many of the green initiatives that were introduced by President Biden during his term. And as we heard, he's already withdrawn from the Paris Accord. I mean, what impact is this going to have on this fight, this global fight against climate change? What impact is it going to have on the rest of the world?
Well, obviously going to have a big impact. The United States is among the biggest carbon emitters in the world. It plays a leading role in moving global issues. And the fact that the United States is adopting this position is a real problem. I mean, obviously, climate change is perhaps the most significant global issue of our time. And in that regard, it seems to me, this is already generating a very strong pushback in the rest of the world. What are we going to do? Climate change is a reality. The recent fires we have seen in Los Angeles are caused by a number of things, but at least one of them is climate change. 2024 was the hottest year in our history. So that, it seems to me, is something we ought to keep in mind. This, retreat from the fight against climate change is something that concerns people very much. In that regard, Latin America, with the Amazon being one of the greatest, forest reserves in the world, plays a very important role in that regard. And for us in the region, the issue is very significant. Brazil is playing an important role in that. That was one issue in which President Biden and President Lula worked together quite closely. Right. President Biden paid a visit to the Amazon when he was in Lima. So that, it seems to me, is a matter that should be and is front and center in the global platform.
Liang, there is an international race underway right now in artificial intelligence, to make progress in artificial intelligence. In fact, President Trump just announced a $500 billion Stargate initiative, he calls it, for AI infrastructure. I mean, that's one thing, but if we look at the rest of the world, how great is the risk that developing countries especially could get left behind? You know, we talk about the digital gap or the digital divide. How big is this risk?
Right. I think the risk is high. And as you know, the WEF, the World Economic Forum, is taking on, it's going on now. And one of the major topics is these, AI age and the cooperations between countries and how to really harness AI, for the mankind, for the good, not for the bad. And I think the United States stance on this is very clear. This is American first. This is American alone kind of policy to AI development. And I think this is concerning because of the digital gap, because of the, AI gap between the United States and other countries. The U.S. does have, a lot of these LLMs. They also have very, a large amount of funds that are going into the sector. And yet the rest of the world, as you said, is behind. But we know that, when it comes to AI governance, this is a global issue. This is not just a U.S. alone sort of approach that can address. Not to mention, I think you also mentioned the climate change and so on and so forth. This is another big topic that is being discussed. And again, the whole world, except for the United States, I think, is really moving towards more, just a green energy transition. And of course, the United States is really parting itself away from the rest of the world. And I think that, again, is unfortunate because the United States is the second largest emitter. And the United States does have the technology and the know-how and the funds, if they will, to really address climate change. But again, the rest of the world is not going to stay put. I think, they will cooperate. They will try to, develop the AI technologies and also try to come up with investment funds. I think China plays a very important role in here as a major developer of the AI technology, right, which is reflected, I think, in the new, DeepSeek as a large language model that is really superior in terms of performance. Yeah. So I think the rest of the world is moving on that regard.
Okay, and that's where we have to leave it. Thank you to all of you for being with us. And that is it for this edition of The Heat. I'm Anand Naidu in Washington, D.C.